in February that it was illegal to consider have these DEI offices in our state universities. Now, mind you, that was nonsense. There was no Supreme Court decision. There was no ruling. There was no Secretary of Education, Justice Department opinion. There was nothing. This was Governor Abbott simply trying to out MAGA Governor DeSantis in Florida, because was the genesis of it right here in Florida. Governor DeSantis came out and said he was going to end AP Advanced Studies and this woke agenda. And Governor Abbott in Texas, being the MAGA that he is, said that I'm not going to allow him to out MAGA me. So this was a solution in search of a problem. DEI programs, first of all, our diversity is our strength. Okay, that's the foundation. And historically, African Americans, as well as people of color, have been, because of Jim Crow laws, excluded. They weren't allowed to matriculate into these predominantly white institutions until really the 50s, 1950s and 60s, right? So these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion were implemented so that they could recruit students of color, they could maintain students of color, they could recruit faculty and staff at these institutions of higher learning, because they knew that diversity was a plus. And the only way to get level the playing field from his systemic racism and discrimination of the past was to implement these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, there was no preferences given for these students, but it fostered an atmosphere that you would look for these students to, like, they may be at schools in predominantly Black areas where you went to recruit and say, hey, would you be interested in coming to the University of Texas? Now, mind you, they're already doing it for our athletes, right? And they didn't say anything was wrong with that. So they go recruiting athletes everywhere. They want athletes on their basketball field and on their their football field and basketball court and track. So they were already doing it for athleticism, but they weren't doing it in academia. So these offices were just there to be able to recruit students and faculty to universities. So this bill, Senate Bill 17, said that those offices can no longer be maintained on public universities. So these offices that have staff and faculty to help recruit and maintain through cultural awareness, no more, okay, in Texas. And we're the second state to implement this behind Florida. And so the Supreme Court decision obviously decided that no longer could race be used as a factor for admission. When historically, again, African Americans, I'm going to specifically focus on African Americans for this discussion, because you can include Hispanics as well. They have been excluded. And so race based admission was only one subtext of everything else. You couldn't just be Black and had a poor LSAT score, or you could be Black and just had a low GPA. It was a factor, right, in everything else. And the Supreme Court has said, hey, you can use preferences if your parents went to the university, right? Or if you can play an instrument, or your family were donors, but you can't use race. So the Supreme Court decision obviously banned race as a factor for admissions for universities. So these two decisions obviously is very troubling for African Americans, and all of us should be on heightened alert on the fact that little progress we were making. Again, we haven't achieved Dr. King's dream of living in a society where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. We don't live in a post-racial America that people hoped after Obama was elected in 2008. There's still so many disparities with higher education and public education and so many other things that these two things alone are going to set African Americans back. So that's just kind of the backdrop. It ends diversity, equity, and inclusion funding for colleges and universities to have those departments, those faculty, that staff to maintain and recruit students. And the Supreme Court obviously gutted the precedent that allow colleges and universities to use race as a possible factor to help achieve more equity and diversity in college entrance for students to be admitted to some of the prestigious universities like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, other schools as well.
Thank you, Rep. Reynolds. And just to lay the foundation before we get too deep into the DEI and affirmative action conversation, may you just provide a brief overview of like definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, like what it actually means? I'm sure folks on the call know what it means, but just to make sure we lay the foundation and touch every angle of it all. And also, are there any specific programs or measures that are affected by Senate Bill 17 other than what's written in the law?
Well, absolutely. So when you think about diversity, what is that? That means diversity of race, African-American, Hispanic, Asian, gender, male, female, LGBTQ, veteran. Those are all forms of diversity, right? And so it's not just Black folks or Hispanics. That included Native Americans. That included Chinese, Japanese, Korean. So it's very broad. It also included diversity when it comes to gender, right? It also included diversity when it talked about students with disabilities, right? Physical disabilities. So all of that is a part of diversity, equity. Equity means that you're trying to have some level of balance, so that you don't have an all-white student population, right? And you have a atmosphere that these students want to be able to be in, and you have cultural programs that keeps them feeling comfortable. And you have, like, for example, offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have student faculty that reflect that diversity. So it's no secret that Black students feel more comfortable with Black faculty. They see people that look like them, that they can relate to them, right? They're not shocked when they see someone using, having cornrows or having dreads or braids, or someone who listens to hip hop. They understand the culture, so they can relate to them, and they can better help them adapt to an environment that they may be uncomfortable with. So these offices were designed to not just recruit students, but help students stay enrolled in these universities, right? So that they would graduate and matriculate, help them with financial aid packages, help them with other things to help make sure that they were comfortable and that they graduated. So that is part of what these offices were designed to do. And they, in large part, were somewhat successful. And I think that is probably why they were attacked. Again, this anti-woke agenda is this whole notion you guys have heard. I'm gonna bring another example that came up, is this nonsense of critical race theory, where we can't teach students the history of slavery because of fear of white guilt. They say that we're indoctrinating these white students to be ashamed of their culture and their heritage because of racism. Well, we can't erase slavery like it didn't exist. Slavery was real, it happened. They're not trying to erase the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews by Hitler, but they want to etch a sketch, and they don't want to talk about slavery, that these white people, part of the reason why there's disparities in wealth and wealth inequalities because of slavery. And then slavery by another name, when we were free, that they put people in jail and then they made them work the labor from the penal institutions. And then the fact that we didn't have property until recently, and that property is one of the biggest forms of wealth and transferring wealth from one generation to another. So systemic inequalities in race and disparities, you have to talk about the history of it, right? They don't want that happen. They want you acting like we're all equal and we all have the same opportunities. All you have to do is work hard, but not talking about, well, if I have to take out student loans and you have parents that have a education fund, then you're not going to come out in debt like I am, and therefore you're going to be able to have more money to buy a house and invest and build more wealth than someone who is poor or a person of color that doesn't have, or is a first generation to go to school. So there's so many barriers. They don't want you talking about that. And so that's where we get this notion, this MAGA movement from the far right that says, hey, they're playing the race card, or they want to defund the police. This Black Lives Matter movement is they're terrorists, but the people who were insurrectionists on January 6th, those are okay, right? Those people were just whatever. They were just civically and patriots. So it's the narrative. They're perpetuating false narratives to stay and maintain power. And then one of the things that they're doing is stoking, white fear to vote for a certain person because they're going to protect these people coming in and taking their jobs from affirmative action, which is all false. So all this stuff that we're seeing right now is not based on a problem. This is based on false narratives that they're putting out there to appease a far right MAGA base, and we're being used as pawns for their political gain. Black people are, and that's just the ugly truth. I see it in the legislature. It comes at the federal government from the far right, and it's trickled down to the states. So this whole notion that Trump said in Charlottesville that there were fine people on both sides when he was talking about skinheads and neo-Nazis, he's normalizing these white supremacists, and these policies are embedded in white supremacy. And that is unfortunately where we are. We're going backwards. We stand on the shoulders of people who made good trouble and advanced the cause of civil rights so that we could have end these barriers of Jim Crow. And now we're seeing them pop up again in the form of Senate Bill 17. And the Supreme Court took us back when they made this unfortunate ruling based on a very partisan MAGA appointed Supreme Court to gut the progress that was made from having race-based admissions as part of admissions. So it's really very political.
Okay, and so I was going to ask too about, I think you already answered, but I was going to ask about what concerns or issues they raised, but you already asked that, but I'll ask a different question. So because you're down there in Austin, you're a legislator, like how partisan is it? Like, are you even able to, are you people who support DEI initiatives, are they able to even convince anybody, or they're just, everything falls on deaf ears? Like, is it?
Frank, you raised a great point. And I can tell you during these hearings, so real quick, the way a bill becomes law is introduced by a legislator, whether it's a state rep or a state senator. They introduce the bill, and then you have a hearing, and then you have people testify for and against the bill, and then the bill comes, if it's voted out, it goes to the floor for a debate, and then it's voted, and then it goes to the governor to sign. So when this bill came, there were so many experts, whether it was faculty, students, people from the NAACP, from LULAC, from other organizations that said, hey, this bill is gonna cause irreparable damage. This bill is a solution in search of a problem. There was no real compelling testimony of why we needed to end diversity, equity, and inclusion. But to your point, Frank, my colleagues fell on deaf ear. Privately, they said, yeah, I don't think we really need this, but you know what? If I vote against this bill, I'm gonna get primaried and I'm gonna lose my election because someone's going to go after me that I'm supporting a woke agenda. That is the language that they tell me privately. The same language they tell me why they can't support common sense gun reform legislation, even though they know that we need it. They don't support it because they're afraid of someone to their right saying you don't support gun rights. You're liberal. You're a rhino, Republican in name only. So unfortunately, you don't have statesmen that says I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the state or the country. You don't have patriots that said, I'm going to stand on principle and what's right. You have many people who are doing it for political expediency and say, even though the majority of citizens says, hey, this is wrong, if the majority of the far right that vote in their gerrymandered districts say this is what we want, that is what they do. And so unfortunately, you see right now where in state government, there's not much civility when it comes to compromise, and when it comes to working in a bipartisan way to do what's in the best interest of our citizens. In this case, Blacks and Browns are used as political pawns, and that is easy prey for this quote woke agenda when they can say, hey, you know what? All we're doing is protecting you so that your students can be admitted to these universities that Black students and Brown students are getting in because of their quotas on race. So we need to get rid of this so that they won't be admitted. Now, we don't mind them coming in our athletes. We want them there because we want to win the championship. Right. And we want the best D1 athletes, but we don't really care if they're in our classroom learning and getting institutions of and getting degrees and professors. We don't care about that. We just want to make sure that we win and they can slam basketballs and they can, catch and run football for touchdowns and win on the track and field. But so that's what I told them. I challenged them and said, look, well, if that's the case, let's just end it for everything. They don't want that because they want to be able to have a special category for athletes, But I think sometimes we have to really challenge the status quo and say, well, if you're going to say that, like Dion, hey, let's send our athletes to HBCUs. This was the whole Jackson State deal. So, but the point I'm making is we have to push back. And sometimes that's the only way to get their attention. The NAACP issued a travel advisory for Florida, right? When they passed this bill, I warned my colleagues on the floor when I was advocating against the bill that Texas would be next, and that perhaps people shouldn't come to Texas that African Americans. They should spend their money elsewhere. So you got to hit them in the pocketbook. So the point I'm making is we have to be able to push back when they use us as political pawns for their own political expediency, because that's what I'm seeing when I'm it's not compelling. Hey, you can say all 90% of experts say this is going to harm Texas, but if there's 10% of the far right say this is what they want, that is what they do. And that's sad, but that's what's happening.
So I guess the next question is, how do you anticipate this bill will impact the community, like particularly marginalized communities? And are there any potential legal challenges that may arise from Senate bill? And I was thinking this before the Supreme Court decision, but I'm sure there's probably potential legal challenges that can come up.
Well, Frank, there are potential legal challenges that we worked. I was, like you said in my introduction, chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. We worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to kind of help build a record for anticipated litigation. I do believe that they're going to bring a lawsuit against Senate Bill 17. The only problem is that, first of all, that lawsuit would be in the Fifth Circuit, which you all may know is one of the most conservative circuits. And then if they were successful, then the state would keep appealing it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, we kind of can already forecast the U.S. Supreme Court and where they where their leanings are. It's a basically a 6-3 conservative majority on the court right now. So they feel very strong about being able to win these lawsuits if they are filed by advocacy groups like the NAACP. But I do anticipate there'll be litigation, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to prevail. But because the implications are less African Americans and people of color will be admitted to these universities. Period. It's going to have a dramatic impact. We're going to have to be more creative in recruitment. I'm talking about we as universities are going to have to be more creative in if they want to achieve diversity. It's going to give people that didn't want to in the first place an excuse. But I think this will open up avenues for HBCUs to have more students matriculate to their universities, because the PWIs are going to likely go backwards. We instead of, we're in 2023, we should be going forward. We stand on the shoulders of people who paved the way for us, but in many regards, things are getting worse because of this anti-Black backlash from the conservative right and the Supreme Court allowing it to happen. Some of this erosion started with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and it's continued to fester, now. So my hope is that the litigation will prevail, and we must keep persisting and fighting and speaking truth to power. And that is why I'm happy to be talking to these law students, because you all are the future litigators. You all are the future leaders of our country. It was Thurgood Marshall that helped usher in so many changes. And it was lawyers like Charles Hamilton Houston and many others that made these advances for us. So hopefully this will spark people like you all to continue to be engaged and to fight, because our futures are at stake. I mean, you guys are fine and well, but what about the next generation, right? I worry about the next generation. You all are in school now, but it's going to be harder. It's really going to be harder for future generations of Blacks to get in some of these schools. And we owe it to them, just like our forefathers did it for us and our ancestors did it for us, to pay it forward for the next generation. So that's the charge that I'm having to you all today, is to make sure that, yes, it's great to go make money, and I want everyone to make money, but make sure that you're doing something to give back. Make sure that you're doing something to use what God gave you to help pay it forward for the next generation, so that we don't go backwards. That we continue to make progress and go forward and fight the resistance.
Thank you, Representative Reynolds. And I just want to highlight, earlier you mentioned gerrymandering, and I appreciate the fact that you mentioned it, because it allows us to see the intersections of all of these systems and how they play a part, and how redistricting, the census, being involved in policy in your home state is so important, and how all of it intersects. And it isn't three different systems. It all plays a part together.
You hit it on the nail. Absolutely. There is an intersection between all of it. It is the sausage that is made. It is all interconnected. And so you're so right. Voter suppression is real. And in addition to gerrymandering, we've seen so much false narratives that have set us back on voter fraud, but it was fake. There was no real voter fraud, but they've implemented these laws to make it more difficult to vote. Like states like Texas and Louisiana and Florida and other states have made it more difficult to vote. It's easier to go get a gun, and it's harder to vote. We made it easier to purchase a gun by permitless carry, right? But we made it harder to vote. The most fundamental right we have as American citizens is the right to vote. They're sending us back. I call it Jim Crow 2.0, because no longer is it how many bubbles in a bar of soap or paying poll taxes and literacy tests. They're creating barriers like, reducing voting hours, like NSOs to the polls. They're limiting drive-through voting and mobile voting, and they're making it so, like in Texas, where we don't have online voting, where you can't now you can't have counties cannot do any more drive-through voting or 24-hour voting. So they're, instead of making it more convenient and easier to vote, they're making it harder and harder to vote, because they believe that that will make it more likely that Black and brown people won't vote, right? And that's a form of voter suppression. And so that is why it's so important that we educate people on the power of voting, that voting matters, elections matter, and that we can't sit any election out, not a local election where you're voting for your city council or your state rep or your constable or your county commissioner or a judge, to the federal level, your US senators and your Congress people, and obviously the president. But every election matters, and we have to, as a people, have to keep instilling that in our young people. I was so proud of young people leading the way after the death of George Floyd and marching for criminal justice reform. But if you marched and you didn't vote, then what? Then what are you doing? You're pissing in the wind. So it's both and. It's not either or. It's both and. We march, we protest, we use our social media, our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, but then we go vote our values, and then we hold our elected officials accountable to make sure that they're advocating and voting for the policies that we care for, or else we'll vote them out. That is why we gotta vote, and that's why we gotta is incumbent upon young people like you all. You all are the Joshua generation. You all are the when John Lewis was in SNCC, he was a young man. It was a young Malcolm X. It was a young King that was leading the way. And so we need for young people to stand up and rise up and continue to assert your rightful place in history by advocating for these issues. And so that is really why I'm so proud of you all for hosting this important topic, because I'm depending on you all to help push and carry the baton forward.
Yes, sir. And we appreciate you for sharing your space with us this evening. But to ask you this, during the procedural posture of SB 17 and building the record throughout the entire procedural posture and testimony, were public opinions and perspectives of everyone even considered during the development of this bill, or was it just like dismissed and they continued to vote on it?
It was dismissed. I mean, there were so many people. Let's say I don't have the record in front of me, but I participated in let's say 1,000 people, and I'm not even being hyperbolic, but let's say 1,000 witnesses testified. About 900 of them testified against Senate Bill 17, and only 100 testified for it. And that is I'm not stretching it. I'm saying you can go look at the record. So the overwhelming majority of people who testified and waited hours and hours in the committee to make their voices heard, students, people of color, people of goodwill, professors, you name it, alumni, faculty, staff, all of them said, hey, this is bad, this is wrong. And they gave their personal input, their reasons why. All of that was disregarded because these people had their mind made up, because it was a litmus test. I have to vote because Governor Abbott said that this is a priority. I have to vote because the MAGA wing of my base wants this, because this is against the woke agenda. So I'm telling you guys the ugly truth, that I'm so proud of these people for testifying and for being engaged. We had a movement. We were engaged because as the Black Caucus, we were engaging the students from Prairie View all the way from UT and A&M, and we had the students against Students for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. They were engaged. They were making good trouble. But my colleagues met it with a closed ear and I mean, I see you, but I don't hear you, because they had their minds made up. So even though there was compelling testimony of why this is bad public policy, they disregarded it because they were hell-bent on passing that bill. And it passed on a straight party line vote. Every Republican voted yes, every Democrat voted no. There was not one single Republican that voted no. There was not one single Democrat that voted yes. So it was a strictly party vote. That's the way it is. So So based on that is my belief that no matter what the testimony was, the evidence was, as you know in school, black letter law, none of it mattered. This didn't matter because they wanted to pass this bill, and no matter what, they were going to pass it, and that's what they did.
I'm not too sure of the makeup with the Texas state representative. Are there any Black Republicans in the state at all? Did they vote on part of it?
There's one Black Republican state representative, and he voted in favor of the bill, and he sits close to me, and he was not excited about it, but he was basically voting, to appease his base. And so, yeah, so, I mean, a lot of times, we see that people vote against their own interests because they believe that it is politically expedient for them to do that. And that's what I believe he did. So, I think as public servants, we have a duty to be on the right side of history. We have a duty to do what's in the best interest of all of our citizens, not just the small fringe of the base that may or may not, be conservative. But that's what it's boiled down to. That's why I think you don't have as many statesmen. You have more politicians, and we need more public servants. We need more people that put the people before politics, that put people before special interests. But that is a diminishing quality that is eroding from people who are just out for themselves and to be reelected or to get a campaign contribution from a special interest group. We need people that are principled, that believe in good government, that believe in being on the moral arc and on the right side of the issue. It takes courage to do that. And you don't see that much anymore. Those are the people that say slavery is wrong. I know it benefits me financially, but it's wrong. Those are the people that said that it's wrong for women to not have the same rights as men. Those were we need more statesmen to step up and hold public office, because right now you have a bunch of self-serving people who are politically expedient, and they go where the wind blows. If the wind blows here, they go there. The wind blows there, that's where they go. We need more people that are more principled and that have a moral compass about doing what's right, even if you stand.
So given the current climate, so how do you see Texas fostering DEI initiatives? Are there any strategies or policies that could be implemented even with the ban? Or I guess, are y'all talking to schools? Is there something we can do? Could we be talking to our schools about different ways that we can still value that?
Yeah, I'm solutions oriented. We know what the problem is. We've identified the problem. We hope that legally it is overturned, but right now it is what it is. And this law goes into effect September 1st of this year, right? So and so we need to look at solutions, and we need to continue to impress upon the presidents and universities and boards of regents that diversity is and should be a paramount goal for every university, and that they should work within the confines of this bill and the Supreme Court ruling to ensure that there's a diverse workforce with the faculty and staff and student population. And so that means being creative in recruitment. That means finding other ways, like, for example, we have the top 10, percent, and that's until that's gutted, that's still legal, right? And so we need to make sure that they're going into inner city schools to, look at those students. And that's one of the challenges they're gonna have. So it's gonna be, we have to, come up with things. I'm happy to see the Biden administration look at offering solutions, because it's going to take all of us working as a team together. Everyone achieves more, and that means you all may have some solutions. It's going to be an all hands on deck. It's going to take a village for us to overcome this barrier, but we can't throw our hands up and give up. We have to forge ahead. We have to be strategic. We have to look at it like this is chess and not checkers, right? We have to be thinking ahead. And so right now we're in the planning mode to make sure that we're looking at all solutions, right? And that's what we're doing as the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. We're doing that in conjunction with the NAACP and Urban League and other allies to make sure that we're utilizing best practices to overcome this setback that we just had. You know, and it's an old saying is a setback is a setup for a comeback. And as long as we're working together collaboratively, we can overcome. And just like our ancestors did, we will sing and we shall overcome, because we will. The only way that we won't is if we quit and we throw in the towel and we surrender. But I know that we come too far to turn back around. And I'm going to work with people like you all who are solutions oriented. There are going to be a lot of naysayers who say, hey, what's the point? I'm not even going to apply. I'm not even going to go to school now. But we need to encourage people that don't let this be a barrier to you forging ahead with higher education. If you still want to go to Harvard, still apply to Harvard. Don't give up. Don't give in. But we have to also work on more tangible solutions to give these colleges, universities tools so that they can continue to find ways to achieve diversity.
Yes, sir. And I think our final question before we get into Q&A with our participants, and you briefly touched on this earlier, Rep. Reynolds, but I wanted to just spend a little bit more time on it. So when we view DEI and affirmative action from a certain lens and look at the how they're so similar between the two. And like I said, you already basically painted the picture on the similarity between the two, but how is this sending Black folks back decades? Like how is where we can see it, but of course it's not happening right now at this current time, but it's going to be happening really soon. So where?
Yeah, it will. I mean, I've read the expert reports where this is going to have a substantial impact, negative impact on African Americans as is. Meaning that if there's no other mechanisms of recruitment and retention, right? So assuming that we don't come up with some best practices to work around this, then this is going to have a chilling effect. This is going to send us backwards to an era of Jim Crow where Blacks were excluded. I mean, it's going to take, I'm being dramatic a little bit, but it's going to have a big impact. And it's going to hurt with some of the professorships. It's going to hurt with tenure. It's going to hurt with, some of the scholarships and endowments. So there's a lot of ramifications for ending race-based policies. It's really going to hurt. And to put it in perspective, African Americans already represent a very small, minuscule minority of the student population at these universities. I mean, we're not talking about we had large numbers. We had small numbers to begin with. So those small numbers were in single digits, 6%, 7%, 8%. It's going to go down. And so most of them didn't have double digits to begin with. We represent roughly 13% of the population in the country, but we didn't represent 13% of the student population or the faculty at these prestigious universities. Minus HBCUs, we were a very, very small fraction of the population. So what is this going to do? It's going to make those small numbers even smaller. And that, for some people, is satisfactory. For some people, they're going to be cheering that on. That may be more Anglos that are going there. That may be more other races, but I'm very concerned about how this is going to impact African Americans. And I know, based on the evidence and the research and the data, that those numbers are going to decrease. And it's our responsibility to do everything that we can to make sure that this is short term. If there's a short term drop, that is not long term, and it doesn't become, like this is the status quo. We need to make sure that if it's a short term drop, that we reverse that trend. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you an example quickly. When I was at Tech, at law school, there was the Hopwood decision. The Hopwood decision, was a challenge to race admissions in law schools, right? Cheryl Hopwood at the University of Texas brought that with some other plaintiffs. Well, as a result of that, the class before me had one African American in it. I mean, doing that after that period, had one African American. I worked with the dean of the law school and others to make sure that we did a better job of recruiting. So they had a budget, and we went and recruited at historically Black universities, and our numbers went up. But there was some intentionality about that, right? It didn't just happen. We made it attractive. Say, hey, we want you here, and this is me going to meet with these students and say, hey, I want you to come to Tech. It's a great environment, and blah 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 blah. If you don't have that intentionality, if you don't have that effort, then it's not just going to happen just by itself. And so we are going to have to be intentional about working to work around Senate Bill 17 and this Supreme Court decision to ensure that we maintain an environment that's diverse and inclusive for African Americans and other people of color. But I'm really focused for this call on African Americans because we are going to be hit hardest by this.
And we are wrapping up. I do have more of another question I'd like to ask, but I'll go ahead and ask it. So I know they're starting with schools, right? But
yes,
since you're on the inside, we have an ear on the inside. So I like to hear what's going on the inside. Or since they passed that, or when they were talking about that, have any other discussions come up as far as like the public sector work? I know they were suing people who had abortions. Could they now sue private businesses if they're hiring for diversity? Is any of that being talked about?
I'm so happy you asked that question, brother. You are clairvoyant. And this is my biggest concern next, because this is a slippery slope. This is a start. They can expand it. So my concern is the next is going to be in employment. Right now, the state of Texas and other states have MWBE, Minority Women Business Enterprise, our hub, historically underutilized businesses where you have an environment that fosters diversity, equity programs, and contracting opportunities within the state and city contracts, where you then recruit minorities for professional services and contracting, construction, and architectural, where primes have to utilize minority subs. Well, the next challenge that we likely to see is them saying it's unconstitutional to have these programs. And therefore, you will have an economic impact that is going to set back African Americans, Hispanics, but particularly African Americans, because when they do disparity studies, they show that African Americans are the lowest end on getting contract opportunities. The most benefactors of these opportunities are white women, because female is a category. Well, if they do this, which I believe that's going to be next, then that's going to hurt African Americans from opportunities to do business with state and local governments. And these are our tax dollars. These are African Americans that are competent, capable, and qualified. Because of these programs, they get some opportunities to build capacity. Well, if this happens, that's going to have a chilling effect on African American small businesses, entrepreneurship, and whether it's lawyers that do bond work, municipal work, or architects, engineers, professional services, contracting, this will be detrimental. But I believe, Frank, to answer your question succinctly, the next wave of legal challenges will be in these MWBE programs that are designed to help remedy past discrimination where African Americans and other people of color were left out. So when it comes to these disparity studies, there's a very small percent of African Americans that are doing business with government contracts. If there was no disparity where you had these opportunities, it'll be unbelievably low. So these have helped us increase our numbers, break into these spaces, help us build capacity, help us build wealth, but that's the next attack. And I see it coming, and I'm praying that we don't end up in the next forum we're saying, hey, how are we going to combat and overcome this setback to businesses where you can use goals, because quotas are illegal already, from the Croson case. I learned that in law school, Richmond versus whatever it was, but it was the Croson case. But quotas are illegal. But goals, you can have aspirational goals. The next thing, I think they're gonna end that, and it's gonna really, 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 really set us back from our business procurement opportunities that exist. Like we have, diverse cities like Houston and Dallas, where you have Black mayors and Black county judges and, that are creating opportunities because of these programs, because historically they didn't have them. Well, if they implement this law that takes that out, their hands will be tied, and all the business can then be done with white men, and that's our tax dollars. And I mean, it's a slippery slope, and I pray it doesn't happen. But that's the next thing that I anticipate that we'll see a challenge with.
We're going to open it up for questions. So I think
I see some hands.
I think Skylar was first, so Skylar, you can come off mute and go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, hey, my name is Skylar Dean, and I'm a rising 3L at Southern University Law Center. And I had two questions. So my first question was, you had stated before that lawmakers are confident that the Supreme Court is going to rule in their favor, and the court is 6-3 conservative right now. So what, in your opinion, is the most prevailing constitutional argument for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And my second question is, because you also stated that because they ruled this way, there's a high probability that more Black students will attend HBCUs now. So how do you feel about the argument that this might be a positive thing? Because as you stated, a lot of those universities go to HBCUs and recruit. So they're taking away that raw talent from HBCUs. So what would your argument be that we can possibly turn this into more of a positive thing?
Well, Skylar, I always try to see the glasses half full. So I do think that the silver lining is that it can strengthen our HBCUs like Southern, Texas Southern, Ramblin', and a lot of them, right? So I think that's a positive. But I think it's also a negative when we know that there's always we shouldn't be limited to just HBCUs. We should also have opportunities to continue to have people that want to go to Ivy League schools like Princeton and Yale and Harvard and Brown. It should be both and, but it's just pretty much putting us in a position where it's not either or, is that they're more likely going to have to go to HBCUs. So I think it should be a choice. I think it should be, some people, choose to go to HBCU. Some people go because that's the only place that they could be admitted. I'd rather for the person to have the option. I think options are always good. So that's my perspective on it. Yes, it can be a blessing, and we have to, make lemonade out of the lemons, right? And when it comes to the Supreme Court, I think that there's some debate about stacking the court, right? Expanding the court, right? Right now is 9 justices. There are some who believe that we should, go to 11. There are some who believe there should be term limits on the Supreme Court, and there should be Supreme Court reform. You all may have seen recently the Supreme Court come under attack from people like Clarence Thomas, who I believe is the ultimate sellout, who benefited from affirmative action in the seat that Thurgood Marshall had, who is now the biggest barrier to diversity, equity, and inclusion and affirmative action. He is the poster boy for the conservative right. He's the Samuel Jackson character in Django, and that is unfortunately where we are. And I'm just being raw with that. So, the Supreme Court right now, that's a lifetime appointment. We see where they are. when Obama had the chance to make an appointment, they obstructed it, so he couldn't do it. And now we're living with 3 Trump appointees that have caused a lot of havoc and has set us back. So it is likely that the Supreme Court currently, Ketanji Brown Jackson can make great dissents, but that's a dissent. The majority opinion is what stands. And right now, those 6 justices are standing together against a woman's right to choose, where we thought Roe versus Wade was settled law, where we thought the Bakke case that allowed race-based admissions was settled law. Now we're seeing that disturbed. So they're upsetting 50 years of precedent, right? And that's unforeseen. These same Supreme Court justices that when they were going through the confirmation process, they said the right things to be confirmed by the Senate. I believe in precedent. And now they're turning their hands and the clock back. So we believe that these challenges, when they go to the Supreme Court, based on similar fact patterns, that we believe that we kind of know what the outcome will be. That doesn't mean we don't fight. It just means that we know that we have an uphill battle. And so I hope that, kind of answers your questions on that.
Okay, actually, on that last part, because I get everything you're saying, which I completely agree with. That's why I'm wondering, what would the constitutional argument be? Because as you said, it was precedent before, so it had already been argued like 50 years ago. So what are you guys gonna go up and argue now? Because you stated that like all of these different groups are trying to work on that. So right now, I know it might be in the brainstorming stage, but what are they thinking about saying once it does reach that level again, like to the Supreme Court?
Sure. That's a good question. I see what you're saying now. I mean, they have good arguments. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but basically they were arguing a lot of precedent, right? And even though most people believe that they were on the right side of the issue, the Supreme Court, as I was stating to Carlos and Frank earlier, when people have their mind made up how they want to rule, it doesn't, facts be down, case law be down. We're going to spin it and use it the way that we want it to come, just like they did with the LGBTQ case about a person not having to, provide a service, right? Just like they reversed Biden's student loan, program. When they want to do something, they can find a way to do it. And unfortunately, no matter what persuasive arguments you're making, and no matter how compelling it is, then they can do it with the stroke of a pen. So what I'm saying is, I believe that the lawyers made very persuasive, compelling arguments. They were just determined that they were going to overrule it. They were just determined that they were going to change it from a fiscal conservative lens. This is what they did. So I think that, there are people who, will continue to make these arguments. The only thing that really happened recently that was positive was the Supreme Court upheld part of the voting rights, in a case that was like a week or 2 before. I had a funny feeling when they did that it was going to be some bad stuff coming behind it, right? And sure enough, in those same cases, you had Clarence Thomas dissenting, even when they did the positive thing on the voting rights case. So all I'm trying to say is, sometimes, when you have a person that have their mind made up, they're going to hear everything and then they're going to write it such that it is enough gray area that they can justify why they wrote the opinion the way they wrote it. And that's kind of where we are with the Supreme Court. It is very partisan. It is very dangerous to fundamental civil rights and against women's rights specifically. We saw that, with overturning Roe versus Wade. And I think that we're going to continue to see more bad opinions if this current Supreme Court stays the way it is.
Would Kasia, KJ has her hand up.
You're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Kaja and I'm a rising 1L at Syracuse. And actually it's very similar to Skylar's question. With like what you're talking about when she was talking about the constitutional argument. My question is kind of what do you say to like university students in light of Chief Justice Roberts' like recent opinion? I haven't finished it fully yet, but he talks a lot about how what universities are looking for isn't really measurable by judicial standards. So I was just wondering what you had to say about like how we could redefine what is measurable by judicial standards, especially in light of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and certain cases like Washington v. Davis and Griggs, and how they define kind of employment discrimination and what could be seen as favoring, race favoring. So kind of just what should we do to make our interests be measurable by judicial standards?
That's a great question. And I'm gonna be very candid with you. I know some very, very great civil rights constitutional scholars. I'm working with some of them right now, like Gary Bledsoe, who is the state president for the Texas NAACP, and also the attorney that we hired from the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. And they are looking at those arguments. They are working in conjunction with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, to name a few, LULAC and MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. Those are some of the entities that we're partnering with, along with the ACLU, to come up and craft those arguments and looking at everything that we can look at persuasively to make these challenges. All right, someone put Attorney Bledsoe in to play with. That's right, Jerry. So I agree with that. So the point is that we are making the arguments. It's not from a lack of a legal acumen and persuasion, right? I think that Thurgood Marshall would have lost this case before this Supreme Court, right? And so I think that we're on the right side in terms of the facts and the law. They are just interpreting it from their own philosophical conservative leaning to come up with the outcome that they want to come up with. If you're predisposed to be racist, then no matter what you say to me, I'm still a racist. So I don't care that the sky is blue and you say it's blue. I'm looking at it from a different lens, and I'm going to come up with an alternative fact. I'm going to come up with an alternative a scenario if that's what I choose to do. So unfortunately, what I'm telling you is that this is the real version where I said earlier in my conversation, it's not theory, it's practice. In theory, you should be able to look at precedent to understand the outcome. That's what we're trained as is law school, is precedent, precedent, right? Latin, stare decisis. We're black letter law. We're trained in those things. And then in reality, you get situations where you have activist judges. That's where they blame liberals, but conservatives are really some of the main ones that are trying to fit a scenario to come up with the outcome that they want. So my only point is we have to be, that's why you see a lot of movement from the left, from like AOC and many of the progressives to say, we need to stack the court. We need to implement term limits because they know that no matter what arguments you make, you're not going to win these cases at the Supreme Court. And so they're saying we need to have a shift, a paradigm shift in the Supreme Court because of the erosion in justices that are really like Lady Liberty and blind justice. We know that's not the case, right? And so my hope is that we will find some reform at the Supreme Court. One of the problems that we have is the filibuster that has prevented things from happening in the Senate even when Democrats had control. And so we have to continue to press forward to remember elections matter. Elections have consequences, and some of the people that slept and sat out the election with Hillary and Trump, and they said, well, what difference does it make? You're seeing the difference right now with those 3 Supreme Court justices that he was able to appoint when he was president. And so it's unfortunate that that's where we are. And it's sad for me to tell law students that something that sounds very cynical, that sometimes it doesn't matter how compelling you are or how accurate you are with the law and the facts, that you still can have a judge or a jury. That's why they call jury nullification. No matter what the facts are, they come up with an outcome. When people want to disregard the law to come up with their own belief of what the outcome should be, then that's what they do. That's what these Supreme Court judges, no matter what that robe they put on, when they come in with certain philosophical leanings. And unfortunately, Trump picked some very conservative people that had an agenda, and we're seeing now the remnants of that. So I said a lot to say, I don't believe it's based on the arguments. I don't believe the arguments are what was missing. I believe that it is the people that are sitting there, and the only thing that is going to change that is either Supreme Court reform or, unfortunately, these justices dying and being replaced because it's a lifetime appointment. I love Ruth, Gator Ginsburg, the notorious RGB, but she held on too long and we couldn't replace her. I'm just gonna tell you the ugly truth, right? Sometimes we have to be more sacrificial for the long term, right? We messed that up, y'all, okay? And now we're looking at Amy Comey Barrett, and we're looking at some very, Roberts, and we're looking at other people on the court that are very different than what an Obama justice would have looked like. So Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown, they can continue to write these great dissents. They can continue to read them from the bench for emphasis. But until we get a majority on the court, we're likely to continue to see these bad cases being decided against us.
And it looks like we have a question in the chat. Tyler asks, will race no longer be explicitly stated in the applications? He assumes that the people in those positions will still consider race as a factor, although it is not required for compliance purposes.
Yeah. So
will they still consider it?
The Supreme Court opened that it could be like in the essay, you could use disadvantage as a part of it. They left that kind of open. So a person could say, hey, I'm an African American that comes from a family that has, poor, that never had, I didn't have a father. I didn't have, I was homeless, and I had to overcome this and overcome that. That could be a compelling argument, right? But so it's not just race; it's race plus. So I think that they're still opening to, in a personal statement, for example, for law school, or an essay for college, that you still can use that in the totality of the picture that you're painting for entrance. So I think that is left open from what I read. And so I think people should still, try to include that and hope that they're appealing to someone who's on that review committee that may actually read it and not just looking at, LSAT or GPA and MCAT or, ACT or so the point I'm making is I think people should still paint the picture to sell themselves, even if it means, articulating and utilizing your race. It's just that, race as a factor for admissions is no longer allowed, but you still can include that within the package. So the Supreme Court didn't say, oh, you can't mention your race on the application. Applications have to be race neutral. They didn't go that far. That's the point I'm making.
Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I think it's been a very productive conversation. And just to touch on some things that Rep. Reynolds said, I think he gave us about 5 call to actions tonight that I wrote down. And one of them was give back and pay it forward for the next generation. I think that it's extremely important that we build this mountain a little bit higher for the folks that's coming after us, just so they can see further than us. People over politics, always and forever. I think that we need to prioritize what the collective need and strategize on how to get it. Be solution oriented. I think that's a principle that we all should live by. We can talk all day about the issues, but what's the solution? And then everyone that's on this call are future lawyers. So especially for us, what's the solution? What's the legal remedy? And get to action to get it done. Work together collaboratively so we can overcome. It takes a village, especially an intergenerational village. I think that it's important that we collaborate and we meet on common ground in the middle with folks who've already done the work, with folks that's coming into the work, and people that's currently in the middle of the work. That way we can collaborate and just build a bigger community. And lastly, you stated just a few minutes ago, be sacrificial and be long-term and collective. So again, I appreciate everyone for joining us tonight. Just some last items before we hop off. I want everyone to please follow us on Instagram at SWBLSA, it's SWBLSA. And also, it wouldn't be me if I wouldn't ask y'all to please also donate to us. We have a lot of programming coming on in the Southwest region coming up. The link is in the chat. You can click on Southwest region to support us and all of the upcoming programs that we have throughout the year. And thank you all again.
And we're gonna have a major and close this out.
Yeah.
And before we jump off, I just wanted to say thank you again, Rep. Reynolds. I appreciate you so much for giving your time and energy to us this evening. I also want to thank some folks from the national board who joined us. I see some miles. We have our national chair, Mr. Adams is on here, the Northeast chair and the Mabulsa chair. So thank y'all so much for participating and joining this evening. We appreciate y'all for sharing space with us and getting engaged with this work. And yeah, thank you so much for participating. Great job, Carlos and Frank.
Hey, I just want to sign off and say you guys were amazing. I want to challenge you guys to continue to press forward. I know it may be, it may seem bleak, but I believe that, you know, with faith and hard work and perseverance that we will overcome, and you can't have a testimony without a test. So y'all keep paying it forward, keep your eyes on the prize and keep grinding, because I think that we're on the right side of history and we will prevail. Just like our forefathers who showed us we stand on, just like they prevail, we will prevail too. And we'll have, the history books will be kind to us fighting against this oppression on the inside, just like they were when, you know, King and Medgar Evers and others did as well. So just keep pressing forward, y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Good night, everybody.